Hi and welcome to my YouTube channel. In this video we will be talking about the heart, its internal structure, its conduction system and cardiac cycle. This video will be a little lengthy as I have tried to explain each topic in as much detail as possible, and I request you to watch this video to the end and not skip any part, otherwise it will be very difficult for you to understand the video completely. If you have any question regarding today's topic, feel free to ask me in the comments section. But before we begin, if you are new to my channel, then click on the subscribe button and press the bell icon so that you receive notifications about our latest videos. Also, don't forget to follow us on Facebook and Instagram. So let's begin. Let's begin with heart. The heart is a muscular organ about the size of a fist, located just behind and slightly left of the breastbone. The heart is made up of muscles. The outer thin layer of muscles is called as epicardium. The major layer of muscles inside the heart is called as myocardium, which is between the pericardium and endocardium. The inner thin layer of muscles is called as endocardium. The myocardium is not plain but is rough and is called as trabeculae carneae. The wall between the two ventricles is called interventricular septum. The wall between the two atrium is called as interarterial septum, and the wall between atrium and ventricle is called atrioventricular septum. Fossa ovalis is a depression in interstitial septum in adults. It is formed because in fetal stage there is only one atrium and it gets divided into left and right. The heart pumps blood through the network of arteries and veins called the cardiovascular system. The coronary arteries run along the surface of the heart and provide oxygen-rich blood to the heart muscle. A web of nerve tissue also runs through the heart, conducting the complex signals that govern contraction and relaxation. Surrounding the heart is a sac called the pericardium. Now let's see the internal structure of the heart. The heart is divided into atrium, which is the upper part, and ventricle, which is the lower part. Atrium and ventricle is further divided into right and left. Thus heart is divided into four parts: right atrium, right ventricle and left ventricle. Right atrium collects the deoxygenated blood from the body. Atria always collects blood from outside of the heart and pushes the blood into the ventricle. There is a valve between the atrium and the ventricle, and this valve opens only in one direction to prevent backflow of blood. The valve between right atrium and right ventricle consists of three flaps and is therefore called as tricuspid valve. The deoxygenated blood from the right ventricle is pumped to the lungs. The lungs oxygenates the blood, and the oxygenated blood from the lungs enter the heart through the left atrium. This blood is then pumped into the left ventricle. The valve between left atrium and left ventricle consists of two flaps and is called bicuspid valve or mitral valve. Now the valves are attached to fiber-like structures known as chordae tendineae so that the valves do not open in the opposite direction or atrium due to pressure. These fibers are attached to muscles known as papillary muscles. When the ventricles are filled with blood, the valves close so that there is no backflow of blood when the ventricles contract to pump the blood through the pulmonary artery in case of right ventricle and aorta in case of left ventricle. To prevent backflow of blood from the pulmonary artery into the right ventricle, there is a valve known as pulmonary valve. Similarly, to prevent backflow of blood from the aorta into the left ventricle, there is a valve known as aortic valve. These valves are also known as semilunar valve. Now let's come to the conduction system of the heart. The muscles of the heart are made up of cardiac muscles. The cardiac muscles form 95% of the heart. All the cardiac muscles are connected with each other through gap cells, due to which there is exchange of intercellular components with each other, which means contraction of one cardiac muscle will cause contraction of all other cardiac muscles. Unlike other muscles, the cardiac muscles are not controlled by neurons for contraction. In heart, the contraction is done by autoexcitable cells which depolarize themselves. The autoexcitable cell to top right of the right atrium wall is called SA node. The autoexcitable cells between the intra-atrial septum is called AV node. Below the AV node is the bundle of His. Bundle of His gives rise to two branches called bundle branches. These branches give rise to Purkinje fibers. The SA node is the most dominant autoexcitable cell of the heart, which depolarizes itself 70 to 72 times in a minute, and hence also called the pacemaker of the heart because it controls the pace or heartbeats of the heart. So now we will talk about the cardiac cycle. The right atrium collects deoxygenated blood and left atrium collects oxygenated blood from the lungs. In this phase, the pulmonary artery, aorta valves and tricuspid and bicuspid valves remain closed. When the right and left atrium are filled with blood, then the pressure exerted by the blood will cause the tricuspid and bicuspid valves to open. This causes the ventricles to fill with blood, which is also called ventricular filling. Please note that there is always some blood in the ventricles, which is around 60 milliliters, which means that the ventricles are never empty. This 60 milliliters is known as end systolic volume. After the blood is filled passively in the ventricles, the SA node gives signal for contraction, causing contraction of the atrium, which causes the remaining blood in the atrium to fill in the ventricles. Now the total blood in each ventricle is around 130 milliliters. Atrial contraction is also called as atrial systole. Atrial contraction is only for 0.1 second. Atrial systole is followed by atrial diastole, which means atrial relaxation. The next phase is called ventricular systole. As soon as the ventricles contract, the tricuspid and bicuspid valves close to prevent backflow of blood into the atrium. The pressure in the ventricles causes opening of the semilunar valves. This causes flow of blood from the right ventricle to the lungs, from the pulmonary artery, and from the left ventricle to the body through the aorta. This causes relaxation of the ventricles, called as ventricular diastole. After the blood is pumped out of the ventricles, the semilunar valves close to prevent backflow of the blood into the ventricles. This complete cycle makes one cardiac cycle. The amount of blood pumped out of each ventricle is 70 milliliters, which is known as stroke volume. The amount of blood pumped out of each ventricle in 1 minute is 5040 milliliters, which is approximately 5 liters, which is total amount of blood in your body, which is known as cardiac output. Duration of each cardiac cycle is 0.8 seconds, which gives us 72 heartbeats in 1 minute. Out of the 0.8 seconds, 0.4 seconds is of joint diastole, in which atrium and ventricle are relaxing. After 0.4 seconds, atrial filling starts to take place. In this, there is filling of the atrium and passive filling of the ventricles. After 0.4 seconds, the atrial systole starts, which is of 0.1 second. In this, active ventricular filling takes place. During this whole period, the ventricles are relaxed, so this whole duration is called ventricular diastole. The total amount of blood in the ventricles at this stage, which is around 130 milliliters, is known as end diastolic volume. Now ventricular systole starts, which is of 0.3 seconds. Now the atrioventricular valves close to prevent backflow of blood into the atrium, which causes the first heart sound known as LUP. After that, opening of semilunar valves takes place and the ventricles push the blood into the pulmonary artery and the aorta, which is called ventricular ejection. After this, the ventricles start to relax and closing of the semilunar valves take place to prevent backflow of blood into the ventricles. Closing of the semilunar valves causes the second heart sound, which is known as DUP. So the first heart sound occurs at the start of ventricular systole and the second heart sound occurs at the start of ventricular diastole. That's all for this video. If you have any doubts, you can ask your question in the comments section below. Don't forget to like and share this video. Thanks for watching.